Ray was a lean, sharp-faced youth with tired eyes that held more years than he'd lived. He had learned early that the city didn't care about you unless you had something to offer. He did anything to survive, washing cars, carrying loads in the market, or running errands for the wealthy. One of his regular clients was Alice. Alice was a mysterious woman in her late 50s, living in an enormous mansion that could have housed a small village. She was rich in a way Ray couldn't even imagine. Polished floors that reflected your face, chandeliers dripping with crystals, and a garden so lush it smelled like paradise. But what set Alice apart wasn't just her wealth. There was something strange about her. Alice had a soft voice, always measured, and her gray eyes seemed to see more than they should. She was kind to Ray, often giving him food to take home after he helped with her errands. But there was a hunger in her gaze, one that made him uneasy. Ray never thought much of it until one day when Alice invited him for tea after his work. They sat in her grand living room, the air scented with lavender. As they talked, she asked, "Ray, do you have any family?" He hesitated. "No, ma'am. It's just me." "And friends?" she pressed. Ray smiled. "Us one. His name's Clinton. He's blind, but he's the best person I know. I always share the food you give me with him." Alice leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Blind, you say? And where does Clinton live?" "He stays at a small shelter downtown," Ray replied, not thinking much of it. "I visit him whenever I can. He's like a brother to me." Alice nodded slowly, but her mind was already far away. That night, she lay in her massive bed and stared at the ceiling. Clinton. Blind man. She couldn't explain it, but something about the idea stirred a dark desire within her. The next time Ray visited Alice, she seemed unusually cheerful. She handed him a tray of pastries and asked casually, "Why don't you bring Clinton with you next time? I'd like to meet him. He sounds like a wonderful person." Ray hesitated. He wasn't sure why, but the request felt strange. "I don't know if he'd want to come, ma'am. He's shy around strangers." "Nonsense," Alice said with a warm smile. "Tell him there's plenty of food here, and he can rest in comfort. I promise I won't bite." Ray nodded reluctantly, unsure of what to say. The next day, when he visited Clinton at the shelter, he brought up the idea. "Clinton, you won't believe it," Ray began, his voice light. "The lady I work for wants to meet you. She says she has plenty of food and a nice place for us to hang out." Clinton tilted his head. His unseeing eyes focused on nothing. "Why would she want to meet me? I'm just a blind man." "Maybe she's just kind," Ray replied, though the words felt hollow. "She's always been nice to me." Clinton sighed but eventually agreed. "If it makes you happy, Ray, I'll go." A few days later, Ray led Clinton to Alice's mansion. Clinton gripped Ray's arm tightly, his steps hesitant. When they reached the grand gates, Clinton's lips parted in awe. "This place must be huge," he murmured. "You have no idea," Ray replied. Alice greeted them at the door, her smile radiant. "Clinton, it's such a pleasure to meet you." She guided him inside, her hand lingering on his arm. Ray noticed her touch, and something about it made his stomach twist. The afternoon passed in a blur. Alice doted on Clinton, feeding him delicacies and asking him endless questions about his life. Clinton, though cautious, warmed up to her kindness. Ray watched from the corner, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. As they left, Alice handed Ray an envelope. "Take this as a token of my appreciation," she said. When they were alone, Ray opened it. Inside was more money than he had seen in months. "Why would she give you so much?" Clinton asked, his voice wary. "I don't know," Ray admitted, pocketing the cash. But deep down, he wondered what Alice's true intentions were. That night, Alice sat by her fireplace, her heart racing. Meeting Clinton had only intensified her obsession. His vulnerability, his innocence, it all drew her in like a moth to a flame. "I must have him," she whispered to herself. "No matter the cost." Meanwhile, in his tiny room at the shelter, Clinton lay awake. Something about Alice's smile had unsettled him, though he couldn't explain why. And Ray, clutching the envelope of cash, stared out at the dark city. For the first time, he felt a crack in his loyalty to Clinton. The city of Lagos was full of shadows, and one of them had begun to creep into his heart. Ray's days grew more restless after his visit with Clinton to Alice's house. He couldn't shake the image of Alice's overly cheerful smile or the way she seemed to watch Clinton's every move. It wasn't like her usual politeness. There was something lurking beneath her friendliness, something Ray couldn't quite name. A week later, Alice invited Ray back to her house. He arrived early as usual, ready to do his tasks and leave quickly. But that day Alice seemed different. She wasn't rushing around giving orders or planning her extravagant meals. Instead, she sat at the dining table, sipping tea, her eyes following Ray like a hawk. "Ray," she called softly, "come sit with me." Ray hesitated but obeyed, sitting awkwardly across from her. "I've been thinking about your friend Clinton," Alice began, her voice smooth as silk. Ray's chest tightened. "What about him?" "He's a special man," she said, her lips curving into a smile. "There's something pure about him, something untouched by the world. I can't stop thinking about him." Ray shifted in his seat, unsure of where the conversation was headed. "He's a good man," he said cautiously. Alice leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Ray, I want to take care of him." Ray blinked in confusion. "Take care of him?" "Yes," Alice continued. "Clinton deserves more than a shelter and scraps of food. He deserves luxury, comfort, and someone who truly appreciates him. I could give him all that and more." Ray frowned. "I don't understand. What do you mean?" Alice reached into her pocket and pulled out a check. She slid it across the table, her fingers lingering on the edge. Ray stared at it, his mouth dry. The number written on the check was astronomical, more money than he could ever hope to earn in his lifetime. "I want Clinton to stay here," Alice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Permanently?" Ray's heart raced. "You mean, you want me to bring him here to live with you?" Alice nodded, her smile widening. "Exactly. You said he's an orphan, no family to care for him. This would be a better life for him. And for you." She tapped the check. "With this money you could start fresh. Move out of the slums. Build something real for yourself." Ray stared at the check, his thoughts spinning. The offer was tempting, too tempting. But a cold chill ran down his spine as he thought about Clinton. "What would you do with him?" Ray asked, his voice trembling. Alice's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Take care of him, of course. He would be like family to me." Ray wanted to believe her, but something about her tone felt off. "I don't know, ma'am. Clinton trusts me. I can't just hand him over." Alice's gaze hardened, and for the first time, Ray saw a flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. "You wouldn't be handing him over, Ray. You'd be giving him a better life. Think about it." That night Ray couldn't sleep. The check burned in his pocket like a hot coal. He thought about the tiny room he shared with rats, the nights he went to bed hungry, and the endless struggle to survive in a city that never cared. The money Alice offered could change everything. But then he thought about Clinton. His friend, his brother in all but blood. Clinton, who trusted him blindly, who believed Ray would always look out for him. The next day, Ray visited Clinton at the shelter. Clinton was sitting in his usual corner, his hands running over a small wooden carving he'd been working on. "Ray," Clinton said, his face lighting up, "you're here. I saved you a spot." Ray sat down beside him, his chest heavy with guilt. "Clinton," he began hesitantly, "what if I told you someone wanted to help you? Someone rich, who could give you a better life?" Clinton frowned, his fingers pausing on the carving. "What are you talking about?" "There's this lady," Ray continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "She's kind and she has money. She wants to take care of you, give you everything you've never had. You wouldn't have to live here anymore." Clinton's frown deepened. Why would she want to do that? She doesn't even know me. Ray forced a laugh. Maybe she just sees how special you are, Clinton. Maybe she wants to help. Clinton shook his head. It doesn't make sense. People don't just give without wanting something in return. Ray swallowed hard, unable to meet his friend's unseeing gaze. Maybe this is your chance, Clinton. A better life, no more struggling. Don't you want that? Clinton was silent for a long moment. Finally he nodded. If you think it's a good idea, Ray, I trust you. The words hit Ray like a punch to the gut. You trust me, he whispered. Always, Clinton said with a small smile. A few days later, Ray returned to Alice's house with Clinton by his side. Alice greeted them at the door, her face lighting up with a joy that seemed almost unnatural. Clinton, she exclaimed, pulling him into a gentle hug. Welcome back. You're going to love it here. Ray hung back, his stomach twisting. As Alice led Clinton inside, she turned to Ray and whispered, "Follow me." She took him to a small study and handed him a duffel bag. It was heavy, and Ray didn't need to open it to know it was full of cash. "This is for you," Alice said with a smile. "You've done the right thing, Ray." Ray took the bag, his hands trembling. When they returned to the main room, Alice was already guiding Clinton toward a different part of the house. "Where are we going?" Clinton asked, his voice uncertain. "To your new room," Alice said sweetly. "Don't worry, dear. I'll take care of you." Ray watched as the door closed behind them, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time in his life, he felt like he'd sold something more valuable than money could ever replace. The streets of Lagos buzzed with life, but for Ray, everything felt muted. The duffel bag of money sat heavy in his tiny room, a constant reminder of what he had done. He couldn't stop replaying the moment Alice had led Clinton away, her voice dripping with false sweetness. He tried to tell himself it was for the best, that Clinton would live better in Alice's mansion than in the shelter. But every time he thought of Clinton's face, his chest tightened. Meanwhile, inside Alice's mansion, Clinton quickly realized that things were not as they seemed. The first day, Alice had been kind, almost motherly. She showed him to a spacious room, fed him a meal fit for royalty, and told him to rest. "This is your home now, Clinton," she had said, her voice warm. But the warmth faded by the second day. Alice's tone grew sharper, her touch lingered too long, and her questions became more personal. "Do you have any experience with women?" she asked him one afternoon, her voice low. Clinton, seated in a chair, stiffened. "What do you mean?" Alice chuckled softly, running a hand over his arm. "I just want to know about you, dear. That's all." Clinton's unease grew. He tried to keep his distance, but it was impossible. Alice was always there, hovering, touching, invading his space. One night, Clinton woke to the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of his bed. His heart raced as Alice's voice drifted through the darkness. "You're so special, Clinton," she whispered. "I've never met anyone like you." Clinton's breath hitched. "What are you doing here?" Alice ignored his question and brushed a hand over his cheek. "You don't need to be afraid. I'll take care of you." Clinton recoiled, his mind spinning. "I don't want this," he said firmly. But Alice's laugh was cold. "You don't have a choice, dear. You're mine now." Days turned into a blur of torment for Clinton. Alice's obsession became suffocating. She controlled his every move, denying him the freedom to leave or even communicate with the outside world. He was a prisoner in the mansion, trapped by her twisted desires. By the time Ray came back to the mansion to work, the change in Clinton was glaringly obvious. Clinton looked pale, his face drawn, his hands trembling. "Clinton," Ray whispered when Alice wasn't looking. "What's wrong?" Clinton turned his head toward Ray, his unseeing eyes filled with despair. "She used me," he said quietly. She won't let me go." Ray's stomach churned. He wanted to believe that Clinton was exaggerating, that Alice couldn't possibly be capable of such cruelty. But the evidence was right in front of him. Later that day, Alice cornered Ray in the kitchen. She was smiling, but her eyes held a dangerous glint. "Ray dear," she said, "I hope you're not filling Clinton's head with any silly ideas. He belongs here now. You've been paid, so your part is done." Ray felt a surge of anger but forced himself to stay calm. "I just want to make sure he's okay, ma'am." Alice's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He's fine. Better than fine, actually. But you need to understand something. Clinton is mine. You brought him here, and now he's my responsibility." Her words hit Ray like a slap. He had sold his best friend, and now he was powerless to help him. That night, Ray sat in his tiny room, the duffel bag of money at his feet. He thought about Clinton's words, "She used me." He thought about the way Alice had smiled, so sure of her control. He had betrayed the only person who had ever trusted him completely. The money felt dirty now, a weight he couldn't bear. Ray made a decision. He couldn't leave Clinton in Alice's hands. No amount of money was worth the price of his soul. The next day, Ray returned to Alice's mansion under the guise of work. As he cleaned and completed his usual tasks, he kept a close eye on her movements, noting when she disappeared into her office or stepped out for errands. When Alice left the house in the late afternoon, Ray seized his chance. He found Clinton sitting in his room, his head bowed. "Clinton," Ray whispered, grabbing his friend's arm. Clinton flinched but relaxed when he recognized Ray's voice. "What are you doing here?" "I'm getting you out of here," Ray said firmly. Clinton shook his head. "She'll never let me go." "She doesn't have to know," Ray said. "I'll figure it out. But we're leaving tonight." Clinton hesitated, his hands trembling. "Ray, why are you doing this? You sold me to her." Ray's heart shattered at the words. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I made a mistake, Clinton. I thought I was helping you, but I was wrong. I'll make it right, I promise." For a moment Clinton said nothing. Then he nodded. "Okay. I trust you." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the mansion in shadows. Ray and Clinton waited until the house was quiet, then crept through the hallways, their movements careful and deliberate. Ray's heart pounded as they reached the front door. He fumbled with the lock, his hands slick with sweat. But just as he swung the door open, a voice stopped them cold. "And where do you think you're going?" They turned to see Alice standing at the top of the stairs, her expression cold and furious. Ray stepped in front of Clinton, his hands balled into fists. "We're leaving." Alice descended the stairs slowly, her presence like a predator stalking its prey. "You think you can take what's mine and just walk away?" Clinton clung to Ray's arm, his body trembling. "Please let us go," he whispered. Alice laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the house. "You don't understand, do you? He belongs to me now. You gave him to me, Ray." Ray squared his shoulders, his guilt replaced by determination. "You don't own him. He's coming with me." Alice's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ray thought she might attack them. But then she smiled, a cruel, calculated smile. "Go ahead," she said. "But you'll regret it." Ray didn't wait for her to change her mind. He grabbed Clinton's arm and bolted out the door, the night swallowing them whole. The streets of Lagos were eerily quiet as Ray and Clinton stumbled through the dark. The glow of streetlights cast long shadows, but Ray barely noticed. His mind raced with fear and regret. Clinton clung to his arm, his steps faltering. "Where are we going?" Clinton asked, his voice weak. "Somewhere safe," Ray replied, though he wasn't sure where that was. He hadn't planned this far ahead. All he knew was that they had to get as far away from Alice as possible. They finally stopped at a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. The receptionist barely looked up as Ray paid for a room with some of the money Alice had given him. Once inside, Clinton collapsed onto the single bed, his face pale and drawn. "I'm sorry, Clinton," Ray said, his voice thick with emotion. Clinton didn't respond immediately. He turned his face toward Ray, his unseeing eyes clouded with pain. "Why did you do it, Ray? Why did you give me to her?" The question hit Ray like a blow. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I thought I was helping you. She promised you'd have a better life, and I believed her. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." Clinton's lips trembled. "Do you know what she did to me?" Ray hesitated, his stomach churning. "No," he whispered. Clinton's voice cracked as he spoke. "She treated me like I wasn't human, Ray. She touched me, used me, and made me feel powerless. I begged her to stop, but she didn't care. She said I belonged to her." Tears streamed down Clinton's face, and Ray felt like the worst person in the world. "I didn't know," Ray said, his voice shaking. "I never wanted this to happen. I'm so sorry, Clinton. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Clinton turned away, his shoulders trembling. "You can't make it right, Ray. You can't undo what she did." The following days were a blur of tension and despair. Ray tried to care for Clinton, bringing him food and water, but Clinton barely ate. He spent most of his time sitting by the window, staring at nothing. Ray couldn't shake the guilt that weighed on him like a boulder. Every time he looked at Clinton, he saw the pain he had caused. He hated himself for being so blind, for letting his greed overshadow his loyalty. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ray sat beside Clinton on the bed. "We can leave Lagos," he said. "Start over somewhere new. I'll find a way to keep us safe." Clinton shook his head. "You think running will fix this? She won't stop, Ray. She'll find us." Ray's chest tightened. "I won't let her take you again. I swear it." Clinton let out a bitter laugh. "You're the one who gave me to her. How can I trust you to protect me now?" The words cut deeper than any knife. Ray looked away, his hands clenching into fists. "I made a mistake, Clinton. But I'm trying to fix it. Please give me a chance." Clinton was silent for a long moment. Finally he sighed. "I don't know if I can trust you, Ray. But I don't have anyone else." Meanwhile, Alice was far from idle. She sat in her opulent living room, a glass of wine in hand, her mind racing. She had underestimated Ray's loyalty to Clinton, but she wasn't done yet. "No one takes what's mine," she muttered to herself. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. The man on the other end answered gruffly. "I have a job for you," Alice said, her voice cold and commanding. "There's a young man and his blind friend. I want them found." The man chuckled darkly. "Consider it done." A week later, Ray and Clinton were still hiding in the motel, but the tension was unbearable. Clinton barely spoke, and Ray was constantly on edge, jumping at every noise outside. One night, as they sat in the dimly lit room, there was a knock at the door. Ray froze, his heart racing. "Who is it?" he called, his voice trembling. There was no response. Ray grabbed a small knife from the table and approached the door cautiously. He cracked it open, but before he could react, a man shoved his way inside, followed by two others. Ray tried to fight, but they overpowered him easily. One of the men pinned him against the wall while another grabbed Clinton. "Let him go!" Ray shouted, struggling against the man's grip. The leader of the group smirked. "Alice sends her regards." Ray's blood ran cold. He watched helplessly as they dragged Clinton out of the room. "No!" Ray screamed, but it was too late. Clinton's cries echoed in Ray's ears long after the men had left. He sank to the floor, his chest heaving with sobs. He had failed. Again. But as he sat there, despair threatening to consume him, a spark of determination flared in his heart. He couldn't let Alice win. He had to get Clinton back no matter what it took. Ray spent the next 2 days hunting for any clue that could lead him to Alice and Clinton. He roamed the streets of Lagos, asking questions, calling in favors, and following whispers of information. Guilt and anger fueled his every step. He finally tracked down one of the men who had taken Clinton, a burly thug named Greg. Ray found him at a local bar. his laughter booming over the chatter. Ray approached, his fists clenched. "Where is he?" Greg turned, his smirk fading when he saw Ray's determined face. "Who are you talking about?" Ray grabbed Greg's collar, slamming him against the bar. "Clinton. Where is he?" Greg chuckled darkly. "You've got guts, kid. But Alice doesn't play games. You don't want to mess with her." "I don't care," Ray growled. "Tell me where she's keeping him, or I swear." Before he could finish, Greg pushed him off, but Ray wasn't done. He grabbed a bottle from the bar and smashed it against the counter, the jagged edge glinting in the dim light. "Talk," Ray hissed, holding the broken bottle close to Greg's face. Greg raised his hands, his smirk vanishing. Okay. She's got him at the old estate by the water. But you didn't hear it from me." Ray dropped the bottle and ran, his heart pounding. The estate loomed over the shoreline, its grand structure casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. Ray crept through the overgrown garden, his eyes scanning for guards. He spotted 2 men near the entrance, their laughter muffled by the crashing waves. He waited until they were distracted before slipping through a side door. The interior was lavish but cold, filled with an unsettling silence. Ray moved cautiously, his footsteps barely making a sound. He found Clinton in a small windowless room, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. "Clinton," Ray whispered, rushing to his friend's side. Clinton's head snapped up. "Ray, is that you?" "It's me," Ray said, his voice trembling. "I'm getting you out of here." Clinton shook his head. "She'll never let us go." "She won't have a choice," Ray said firmly. As they crept through the mansion, a voice rang out. "Going somewhere." Alice stepped into view, flanked by 2 guards. Her expression was cold, her smile cruel. "I warned you, Ray," she said. "You can't take what's mine." Ray stepped in front of Clinton, his fists clenched. "He's not yours. He's my friend." Alice laughed. "Friend? You sold him to me. And now you think you can play the hero? How pathetic." Ray's face burned with shame, but he didn't back down. "I made a mistake. But I'm not letting you hurt him anymore." Alice's smile faded, replaced by a look of fury. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." She turned to her guards. "Take them." The guards advanced, but Ray was ready. He grabbed a decorative vase from a nearby table and smashed it over one guard's head, then dodged as the other swung at him. "Run, Clinton!" Ray shouted. Clinton hesitated, then stumbled toward the door. Ray fought with everything he had, dodging blows and using whatever he could find as a weapon. "Stop them!" Alice screamed, but Ray managed to break free, grabbing Clinton's arm and pulling him outside. They ran through the garden, the sound of shouting and footsteps behind them. Ray's lungs burned, but he didn't stop until they reached the road. A passing car screeched to a halt and the driver, a young man, rolled down the window. "What's going on? Help us!" Ray shouted. The driver opened the door, and they climbed in just as Alice's guards appeared at the edge of the property. The car sped off, leaving the estate behind. Hours later, Ray and Clinton sat in a small diner, their faces pale and exhausted. "Are you okay?" he asked. Clinton nodded slowly. "I think so." Ray leaned back, his hands shaking. "I'm so sorry, Clinton. For everything. I never should have betrayed you." Clinton was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You made a mistake, Ray. But you came back for me. That means something." Ray's throat tightened. "I'll never let anything like this happen again. I swear." Clinton gave a small, weary smile. "I believe you." Alice sat in her mansion, her fury boiling over. She poured herself another glass of wine, her hands trembling. "This isn't over," she muttered. "They'll pay for this. Both of them." But for now, Ray and Clinton were free, their bond stronger than ever. The road ahead was uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure. They would face it together.